Shabbat Shalom, everyone. You may be seated. Usually when I stand up in front of you, I like to think that I am prepared for what I'm going to share as my message, Devar Torah, or sermon on Shabbat. I like to think that has a beginning, middle, and an end, something that will make you laugh a little bit, think a little bit, stoke your mind. Today, I stand here without a beginning, a middle, and an end, without concrete thoughts, without exact direction of where we are in this moment. But I still think that I have a responsibility and, frankly, an urge to share my temperature reading of the events of the last week and perhaps even the last 2 weeks with all of you. And I beg of your pardon that it is not as polished and smooth and organized as I aim to have on regular Shabbatot. Let's start in no particular order. Many people know I was raised in Detroit. And Temple Israel, the Reform synagogue that had the terrorist attack this week, was less than a mile from the house I grew up in. Temple Israel's on Walnut Lake Road, which was affectionately known as Synagogue Way. The reason is there are 3 synagogues that were dotted along the road. B'nai Israel, the synagogue I grew up in, where my dad was the rabbi, and just a few blocks down the road from there was Temple Kol Ami, and then past that was Temple Israel, which at the time was the largest synagogue in the area, and now it's the largest Reform synagogue in the world. Now, there are 4 synagogues on that street. Another synagogue has since been built there. If you were to stand at Temple Israel, which is on the corner of Walnut Lake Road and Drake Road, and you made a left onto Drake, about the same distance from here to Ruckman Road would be the distance it would take to get from Temple Israel to the JCC. And the JCC is about 4 to 5 times the size of our Kaplan JCC in actual footprint. And I say that not to be competitive. I say that so that you understand how enormous the Jewish footprint is in this area of West Bloomfield, which used to be my playground as a child. So needless to say that when the news broke there, it hit home. Hit home because I still have siblings who live there. I have nieces and nephews that live there. I have aunts and uncles and cousins that live in that area. Thank God they're all safe and no one was in the area when it happened. And thank God what ended up happening that horrible day wasn't worse, and it could have been much, much worse. I think the first thing that has ignited my anger has been the incredibly quick way in which the news reports have changed the narrative on this terrorist attack. You know, in the first hours that the attack happened, we knew nothing about the attacker. And I wrote to the congregation that if we were to find out that this attacker were a white nationalist, a Klan supporter, it would not surprise me one iota. And if we found out that this attacker had allegiance to ISIS or Hezbollah and Hamas, or was from Muslim descent, it would not surprise me one iota. And what that shows us is that Jew hatred from the radical right and Jew hatred from the radical left stinks exactly the same. It doesn't matter which direction it is, and it's really hard forensically to unpack what the motives and understanding are. It's exactly the same. And for us in this camp who spend our time worrying about the far right and ignoring the far left, or worrying about the far left and ignoring the far right, shame on you. You really should be worrying about them equally, because in that horseshoe of anti-Semitism, they are almost identical in their execution. The second piece that started to drive me wild was that when the attacker was identified, he was identified as a man from Lebanese descent, and immediately was said that he had loved ones that were killed in Israeli airstrikes in the previous week. Well, where do I begin on that one? As if to say, first of all, that a war in the Middle East is a license to then attack a house of worship in the Midwest. It's a ridiculous permissibility that is even intimated by any news source, yet alone a reputable one. And it's shameful that everything from the BBC to CBS has been sharing this narrative. The second piece that's incredibly troubling about it is that they left out critical parts of that narrative even though they went there. So for example, they said that this person had loved ones that were killed by an Israeli airstrike in the past week. But what was missing, but painfully not only obvious but then proven, is that the loved ones that were killed were known to be operatives for Hezbollah, which is a known and deemed terrorist entity by the United States, by Canada, by EU, by Australia, and beyond. Wasn't even mentioned. Wasn't even mentioned. You know what else wasn't mentioned? That those strikes that happened against those Hezbollah operatives was in response to a salvo of 100 missiles that came in from Lebanon, sponsored by Hezbollah, into sovereign Israel. And because we have a protective shield called Iron Dome, Arrow, David's Sling, or now Eitan's Beam, because we have that, and because, thank God, these projectiles were intercepted, it's almost like we have to apologize that we saved our people and our land. It's a ridiculous idea that it was, first of all, forgotten, and second of all, not told in its entirety, and third of all, it's tantamount to saying, when a parent comes in and sees two kids crying and says, "What happened here?" It says, "Well, it all started when he punched me back." It's nonsensical. Could you imagine, well, you might be able to do this, if any reputable news source said, "The police fired shots and wounded a black man today," versus, "A man opened fire on police today, the police returned fire and wounded the man. He happened to have been black and a member of a notorious gang." Both statements are true, but one gives you a story in context, and the other leads you down a story that's based out of context and in falsehoods. Both are 100% true. But to do the first telling of saying police opened fire on a black man today is tantamount to igniting fires and open brush that isn't necessary and wrong. It's based on falsehoods. It's based on untruths. It's based on not telling the full context. And they lean on the idea, we didn't lie. We didn't say anything that was false. And it's shameful. It's reprehensible, and they deserve to be called out for it. Because sadly, not only young people, but older people as well, are getting their data and information from places that give staccato information, staccato messages on the news. We don't read articles anymore, we read headlines. We don't watch long broadcasts, we see snippets. That's why TikTok is so popular, because it gives us the information in 30 to 90 seconds. And sometimes life needs more than 30 to 90 seconds. Sometimes we have to read the paragraph that says that Hezbollah launched 100 missiles at innocent civilians in Israel, not at military targets or assets. And Israel responded by precision strikes on those militants who were part of Hezbollah. You got to read another paragraph for that to happen. And I would argue they should lead with that paragraph, not bury that paragraph. I understand it's not nearly as sensational when it says that man bites dog. That gets attention. but there is something dangerous that's happening as a result of it, which leads me to the second point that I think needs to be brought to attention. And that is, we have a false notion in this country that because something is given to us as a right, that right is absolute. The Second Amendment ensures that we have the right to bear arms. But as someone who believes in gun control, someone who also believes in the Second Amendment, that right is not absolute. That right does not mean that people can walk in here with open carry guns, because we have rules in this city and this state, this synagogue, that prohibit that. And it doesn't mean that someone's right to bear arms is more important than my right to go to the grocery store or send my kid to a school or to go to a theater and enjoy that moment or appreciate that moment in safety and peace. Sometimes when those two absolute rights compete with each other, one of those rights doesn't have to be obliterated, but it has to be tempered. And I would argue when it comes to gun control in particular, that right needs to be tempered if it's interfering with basic safety of Americans. And here's the other place where I think a rule is not absolute. We are all entitled to free speech. All of us. Even speech that is abhorrent, even speech we don't like, we are entitled to. But we are not allowed to have incitement speech. We are not allowed to speak in a way that will cause harm or danger to others. We're not allowed to yell fire in a crowded building unless there actually is a fire in a crowded building. And the reason we're not allowed to yell fire in a crowded building is because, one, when there actually is a fire, if there isn't, it will be tantamount to crying wolf, and people won't believe it, and people can get hurt. And second, if we yell fire in a crowded building and people exit and get hurt, and there is no fire, then the damage that happens to those people is on us for that false claim. And I would argue that while we have an absolute right to freedom of speech, it doesn't give a right to incitement and doesn't give a right to hate speech. And that when people like Tucker Carlson are saying horrific things about the state of Israel and the Jewish people that are unfounded and untrue, that we have a responsibility to not ignore it, as some would say, but to call it out and even sanction the man. And when I say sanction, I mean anything in our possibility, including squelching him, putting him under arrest, if necessary. Has to be for cause, not just because. But when Tucker Carlson says what he says about Jews or the Chabad movement unfounded, and God forbid, someone does what they did in Bondi to the Chabad leaders because they were inspired by Tucker Carlson, he cannot solely rest on the idea of free speech. Not if it's going to lead to the harm of another person. And we can't ignore it if that person is Jewish because they inherited a long line of hatred. Tucker Carlson should be held responsible, no different than the father of a shooter who bought his child an AR-15, and the child then was shot up a school. That father was also held responsible for his role in that act. And we cannot ignore the incitement that these fringe, crazy lunatics are giving and amplifying. Because what scares me the most about Tucker Carlson is not that he's smart. I don't think he's smart. It's that he's got 5 million listeners daily. 5 million. That's half the population of Jews in America. That's what scares me about him. And it's the same thing with Megyn Kelly, the same thing with Joe Rogan, same thing with Nick Fuentes. It scares me. And if we continue to ignore it, then we are allowing their amplification to continue, and that is an existential danger for all of us. And here's the third thing of 4 that I will share with you that I think dovetails into this traumatic week. The mayor of New York, Mr. Mamdani Zohran, had an iftar dinner at Gracie Mansion. And I have to tell you, there's a part of me that loves that Gracie Mansion hosted an iftar dinner for a Muslim mayor. I think that's great. I know that Ed Koch and Michael Bloomberg had seders in Gracie Mansion. I think it's great. Whether we have a Christian, we have a Muslim, we have a Jew, they should celebrate their religion. It is their home. I have no problem with that whatsoever. What I have a problem with is who Zohran Mamdani invited to that iftar dinner, which is a traditional dinner that is had every night at the end of each day of Ramadan while they're fasting during the day. He had Mahmoud Khalil, who was the chief architect and agitator of the riots that happened against Israel and Jews post-October 7th on the campus of Columbia. Someone who does not have U.S. citizenship, and someone who is known to cause danger to Jewish students on campus, and who incited that same kind of danger for others on other Ivy campuses and the like. Perhaps most troubling is that Zohran Mamdani said in a news conference, as he celebrated this iftar dinner with his host and posted it in social media for all to see, with his wife proudly serving him food for iftar, is that Mahmoud Khalil belongs in New York City and in America. He has a place here, and we will fight to keep him here. I find that wildly hypocritical from a man who proudly campaigned on the fact that if Benjamin Netanyahu, the duly elected democratic leader of the only democratic country in the Middle East, were to step foot in New York, he would use his powers to arrest him. So on one hand, we're going to take a man who agitates, incites, and permits violence as long as it's against Jews and Zionists, and we're going to welcome him into the equivalent of a White House for the mayor of New York City. But when the duly elected leader of the state of Israel steps foot into New York City, in his role as the head of state, he should be arrested. That's hypocrisy at its best, everyone. And here's another dose of hypocrisy for you. When Zohran Mamdani's wife liked repeatedly, over 70 times, different posts online that glorified and celebrated the horrific acts of October the 7th, the raping of women, the brutalization of children, the kidnapping of adults and Holocaust survivors, and refused to condemn the liking of those posts. It was Zohran Mamdani who said, "My wife, she is just a citizen. She is just a bystander. She is not part of the elected capacity in this role." I heard two good lines in response to that. I didn't invent them. The first was, "She's just an innocent citizen, a civilian. So was Ava Braun." Here's the other one I heard. "Every person at the Nova Festival, the kids dancing, those who were abducted, the women who were raped, they were all citizens and civilians also. None of them were elected officials either." Where is the hypocrisy of a woman who stands as the wife of the mayor of New York and handing Mahmoud Khalil food for iftar and celebrating it, but then saying, when I love that Jews are being persecuted and killed and raped, then I'm just a civilian? You know what that reminds me of? It reminds me of the Hamas militant in Gaza who shoots up at Israeli soldiers, but then he puts his gun down and puts a white coat on and says, "I'm a doctor." Or he puts a vest on that says, "I'm part of the press." And when he's killed, the same press say, "Israeli soldiers killed a physician today," or "killed a journalist today." How can you be a guerrilla on one day and then a physician or a journalist on that same day, and lean on one for protection and on the other for offense? It is a force field that's being built around you that makes you impervious to having any sense of responsibility for your actions put upon you. And here's the third thing I would say, or fourth actually I should say. I have heard from many, even in our community, what is the end game of this war that we are in with Iran? And how much longer can we take it? I mean, my goodness, gas is up 60 cents a gallon, Rabbi. I went from paying $35 to $40 for my tank of gas. That's what they tell me over a dinner at Demora that costs $600. That's what they tell me when they're posting online from their $25,000 4-day getaway. That's what they tell me with the picture of the new car they just bought that costs more for gasoline. That's $128,000. Meaning, I think people are looking at it through the wrong lens. And what I want to suggest on this issue is as follows. See the price at the pump as a tax that all of us have to pay. It's a tax, and here's the tax. It's a tax on living in a world that is freer from tyranny, from oppression, and from those who seek to do harm to Western values, especially those that represent those values in the Middle East, but all over the world. It's a tax. And we have to pay a tax, just like we have to pay a tax for a bunch of things, some that we don't even use. But this one, we use. It will come as no surprise to people who are regulars in the synagogue, who follow me on any media platform, that I am not the champion of the Donald Trump fan club. I find much wrong with this man and what he does. But you'll also know from those same platforms and things that I've shared, even on this very bima not so long ago, that I am the champion of the umpire groups, of calling balls and strikes the way that I see him. And even with all that is wrong that our president has done, and I promise you, when he does something that I find morally abhorrent, when he does something that I think is against the grain or the values of our country, I will continue to stand right here and tell you. But at the same time, I will tell you what I think he gets right. And I promise to do the same for as long as God puts air in my lungs, regardless of the party or the person who is representing our country. Democrat, Republican, Biden, Trump, doesn't matter to me. And on this war, while he has failed to articulate the reason well and compelling and consistently, it is the right thing to take down the tyranny and the radical regime that is Iran. And I'll tell you why. One, Iran, for almost the last 50 years, since 1979, has oppressed women in most significant ways. Two, they have repressed people who want to bring any sense of Western value or culture to their country, and the way that they squelch that is not by putting them in prison, but by hanging them and murdering them. People who are LGBTQ, without any form of proper trial or due process, are publicly hung off cranes for the world to see. That's how it works in Iran. And they're opposed to Western civilization and culture. They were opposed in 1981 and 82 when they had their DNA and fingerprint in the embassy and then Marine barracks bombings that happened in Beirut. They were opposed to them when they bombed the towers in Saudi Arabia that housed Americans and any form of American representation that lived in the Middle East. And they are opposed to it in Israel, which represents the same Western values. And the reason why Israel and America are combined on this front, it's not because of votes or allies, it's because we have shared values. And in those shared values, we are standing and fighting for our survival, not today, but tomorrow. Iran was enriching uranium proudly to the point of weapons grade. Whether we took them all out in June or not, I don't know. And part of the reason I don't know, and you don't know, is because we haven't had transparency from that leadership on any side. But what we do know is that if they do get their hands on it, or they are able to secure that weapons grade level of that enriched uranium, that they can hold the entire world hostage. They would be the only nuclear power in OPEC. And what you're seeing today at the pump would be a drop in the bucket from what it would be tomorrow. That's number one. Number two, They have amassed thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of ballistic missiles that are almost the size of this room that can do devastating and irreparable damage, which we have seen in Israel. And when you send 100 of them over to Israel and our interceptors have a 95% capture rate, it still means 5 of them are going to get through. And when one of them land indiscriminately, as they have so far, in either a Jewish home or even an Arab home, which they have done both this week, they can do irreparable damage and they can take away lives. And when they amass hundreds of thousands of ballistic missiles, they do that to give protection from those who seek to stop them from their enrichment of uranium. And the same thing with the suicide drones that they have. So I believe Israel and even America have a moral responsibility to stop Iran from its stated publicly goal of annihilating Western values and those that seek to continue it. And it's not pretty. It's not something we need to celebrate. It's not something we have to be happy about. And there are prices that even you and I will feel. We'll feel the price of the cost of this war, which might last 4 weeks or 14 weeks. We'll feel it in our pocketbooks. We'll feel it at the pump. But I promise you, we would feel it in ways that are incalculable should those behaviors or that enrichment of uranium reach a level that would allow that level of cruelty, dictatorship, and desire to continue this radicalism westbound towards Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and of course Israel, and all of the other countries in the region. And if you don't think that Iran would do harm to them, just take a look at how the Emirates are reacting today, or how Saudi is reacting today, or how Qatar or Kuwait is reacting today in this unprovoked attack on their soil. It's just a small taste of what they would do and how they would do it if they had even more power. We can't quit early. We have to finish the job, and it's going to take time, and there are parts of our lives that will be affected by it, and there are parts of lives of people who we will probably never see or meet in the world. Most of them probably live in the heartland of America. And they're going to make the ultimate sacrifice because they're going to go and serve. Maybe it's on a tanker or maybe it's at a base in Riyadh. And they might sacrifice their lives for this act. And I don't want to be cavalier for 1 second about that sacrifice. I am indebted beyond words for all of my life for that sacrifice, for this country that I love. And that is a hell of a price to pay. But no different than storming the beach at Normandy. We must pay that price to overthrow this radicalism. And I want you to not see it as a pain in your pocket at the pump. I want you to see it as a necessary tax for the future of our morality. And for living in a world where we can be Jewish or American or supporters of Western values freely. Everyone has a price to pay in that process. I can't make sense of this terrible act at Temple Israel in my hometown. I can't explain away the unspeakable and hypocritical acts of Zoran Mamdani. I can't give you reason to why the media from London to California and everywhere in between twists and manipulates and distorts what is the reality and the truth of who we are and how we are. And I can't tell you that I think that this war is silly, because I don't. I think all of us have to gird up to fight our own war, to explain to those in the water cooler or on the social media platforms of life why we're here and why we're doing what we're doing, and to call out the wrong when we see it and to promote the good when we see it, because what we have learned from time immemorial is our silence leads to the fuel of our agitators and haters. All of us have to weaponize our voice and our moral courage, or else we aren't going to inherit the world that we deserve to. May we find that courage. May we find that voice. And may it lead us to a peace that our children and grandchildren can look back on and thank us for storming that proverbial beach once again. Shabbat shalom, everybody.